Hello everyone. Today I will tell you a bizarre and chilling story that will make your skin crawl back to when I used to live in that apartment. I won't use my real name, so you can call me Alex for the story. Anyway, I used to live in that old rusty apartment when I graduated from college and was short on money for a while. At first, everything seemed to be normal. I had all that I needed at the time for a normal living. Yes, sure, the environment was poor, no denying that, but I was as well. Let's take a step back for a moment, and let me tell you about myself. As I said before, I'll call myself Alex today. So after I managed to graduate college, I had no money whatsoever. You see, my parents worked their whole life so I can acquire a degree in hopes I'll get a future they couldn't get themselves. Our family has always been poor. My dad worked as a building constructor, and my mom was a cashier at a local mini market in the neighborhood. They always told me how important education really is, and that one day I will go to college and have a better life than they had. And so, I went to college. I can't lie, I was a good student. My grades were rock bottom, and I almost didn't make it. Eventually, somehow I got the degree, but like every other guy that graduated, I had no money left, and I needed to find a job and a place to live. That's how I found the apartment I am living in now. Back to the story. I lived in apartment number 201, and next to me at number 202, there was this old lady, they said. I never saw her. My neighbors told me she has been isolating herself there for a few years now. They haven't seen her all that time. They say no one comes to visit her. She has no family and wasn't the nicest lady, say the least. Weeks have passed since I moved in. I managed to find a job as a bartender down the street. Slowly but surely, I started building my own life brick by brick. One night when I came off my shift, I was a bit drunk. When I entered home, I heard whispers. I was looking around to locate where they were coming from, but it suddenly stopped. I sat on the couch to relax after a long day, and after a few minutes, I heard it again. This time it was clear the whispers came from the vent that is mutual to me and to that old neighbor of mine from room 202. As I got closer to try and hear clearer, there was a big bang that threw me off. I panicked and went to sleep trying to understand if I really heard noises coming from her apartment or if I was just too drunk. Next morning, I shook it off like nothing happened and prepared to go out for my shift. I ended my shift. Nothing unusual had happened so far. I walked to my apartment and entered inside. I took a can of beer and sat down by the TV. About half an hour passed, and suddenly I heard those whispers again. I got closer to the vent and tried to see anything, but it was too dark. I grabbed a flashlight to try and see what's in there, but I still couldn't see anything. Then out of nowhere, I heard someone screaming in pain. I rushed to her door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I knocked so hard my hands turned red. I stepped closer to look through the peephole of the door, but as I got closer, the peephole got blocked from the inside as someone was looking through it. I yelled, "Open the door," but no one answered. Eventually, another neighbor got outside and told me I imagined that because they would hear it as well. I returned and tried to sleep, but I couldn't sleep all night long. When the sun rose, I told my boss, I ain't feeling well, therefore I can't come to work today. Of course, it was a lie, and I decided to take matters on my own. I decided I'm going to investigate what's going on behind that door. When all of the residents went out to work, I took the screws of the vent out and took a look inside. What I saw inside shook me and turned my stomach upside down. Garbage bags were everywhere, and a strong, rotten smell came out of the apartment. It was all dark. You could see the TV turned on, but it was just a white noise. I could see one door unlocked and slightly opened, and a shadow moving around in there. I decided to go and break in using a lockpick. I snuck out, making as little sound as I could, and started picking at the lock. Eventually, I heard the click of the lock, and I knew it was unlocked now. I knew there was someone inside as I saw the shadow before, and I brought with me a hidden camera. I planted it near the bulb light in the living room and rushed outside without leaving a trace behind. I waited and watched the camera through an app on my laptop. I waited hours for something to happen, but eventually I fell asleep while sitting. It was 2 a.m., and I was woken up by those whispers again. I rushed to look into the camera, and what I saw wouldn't leave my memory for the rest of my life. I have seen a person in his 40s dancing a solo dance with no other than that old lady who lives in the apartment. But as I looked closer, I noticed that the lady isn't moving at all, and then the disturbing facts settled into my mind. This man is dancing with a dead body. I almost threw up as I watched the whole thing. Then he sat her down and played a movie on the TV. I called 911 and told them what's happening. They thought I was crazy and didn't believe me at first. It took me 15 minutes to convince them to send an officer to come. When they finally came, they knocked on the door. There was no answer. They shouted, "Police, open up." Only then the door finally opened halfway, locked by a chain lock. They said they had been called because of a concern for a deceased person. Finally, the door was fully opened, and there he was, that guy I've seen in the camera. The man stuttered, "What deceased person? It's no sense." They said, "Let us get in to make sure everything is all right." He hesitated at first, but let them in. They looked around and found nothing except for that strong, rotten smell and garbage everywhere. He told them that he had bad meat left outside the refrigerator, and that's where the smell is coming from. Eventually, they left by the claim that they didn't find a deceased person and there was no concern for any threat. I obviously knew what I saw and didn't let that stop me from finding out the truth. The next morning, as I was getting ready to leave for work, I noticed a note underneath my apartment door. It was a yellow note saying, "Stop it. You don't want to get hurt." I was furious. Who are you to threaten me? I thought to myself. I had the intent to confront him, but as I was about to do so, I thought to myself, this man danced with a dead body. He is probably going to kill me. I need to leave and make a plan on how to expose him. I hurriedly packed a few essentials and left the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't stay there, not after seeing that nightmare unfold. But I wasn't about to let it go. I had to figure out a way to expose that man without putting myself directly in harm's way. After some thought, I decided to stay with a friend for a few days, far enough from the apartment, but close enough to return if needed. I couldn't stop thinking about the old lady. How long had she been dead? How did no one notice the smell, the mess, or the man's bizarre behavior before? And most importantly, why was the police so quick to dismiss my claims? The more I thought about it, the more it became clear that this was bigger than just a man and a dead body. There was something deeply unsettling about the entire situation. The next day, I went to the police station in person, determined to make them listen. I had the footage from the camera, and I thought that would be enough to convince them. But when I arrived, the officer who had responded to the call the night before seemed uneasy, almost like he didn't want to talk to me. He kept his answers short, and when I showed him the video on my phone, he glanced at it briefly before saying, "This isn't enough evidence. The body could have been asleep for all we know." I was speechless. Asleep? A dead body doesn't look like it's napping. I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue. Something wasn't right. It was like they were actively avoiding the issue. Frustrated and out of options, I returned to my friend's place. That night, as I lay awake, I decided I needed help beyond the local police. I started digging into any news or records I could find about the apartment and the surrounding area. I found a few reports of disappearances in the neighborhood over the past several years. People who had vanished without a trace, their cases still open but growing cold. One name in particular caught my eye, a woman who had lived in the very apartment I was staying in before me. She disappeared about 5 years ago, and there were no leads, no clues as to where she might have gone. No one had connected her disappearance to the man in apartment 202, and now I was beginning to suspect that they should have. My heart raced. I was onto something bigger than I had anticipated. I decided to confront the man directly, not face to face, but by leaving a note under his door, just like he had done to me. I scribbled down, "I know what you're doing. You won't get away with it." I slid the note under his door in the dead of night and quickly made my way back to my friends. The following day, I returned to my apartment to collect more of my things, keeping my guard up in case the man was lurking nearby. But when I got to my door, there was no note this time, just a single, strange noise from the apartment next door. A faint thump. I paused, holding my breath. Was he in there with the body again? I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see for myself one last time, but this time, I wouldn't go in unprepared. I grabbed a kitchen knife, shoved it into my jacket, and made my way to his apartment door. I could feel the tension in the air as I stood there, my hand hovering just inches from the handle. What was I about to walk into? With trembling hands, I knocked. I waited at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. My hand, still resting on the handle, trembled with anticipation. Then, finally, I heard something on the other side, a slow, deliberate shuffle. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the sound grew closer to the door. I stood frozen as the door creaked open just a few inches, still held in place by the chain lock. There he was, his face partially visible through the narrow gap. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, stared back at me, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, though it was laced with a kind of menace that made my skin crawl. I know what you're doing," I stammered, trying to sound confident, but failing miserably. "You can't hide it forever. I saw you last night. The police might not believe me, but I know what I saw." His eyes widened slightly, and for a split second, I thought he might laugh, but instead, he just stared at me in silence. The tension was unbearable. Then, without warning, he slammed the door shut. The force rattled the walls, and I jumped back, my pulse racing. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Should I call the police again? Should I leave and never come back? Every instinct told me to run, but something deep inside me refused to back down. I needed to know the truth. Before I could decide, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. A faint, raspy whisper coming from the vent. It was the same sound I'd heard those nights before. I turned slowly to face the vent in the hallway, the knife still clutched tightly in my hand. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and then a voice. "Help me." It was barely audible, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, weak and desperate. My stomach lurched as I realized it wasn't the old lady from apartment 202. It was someone else. Someone still alive. I rushed to the vent, dropping to my knees and pressing my ear against it. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "What's happening?" "Please," the voice whispered again. "He has me. I'm in the basement. Please help." The basement. I didn't even know the building had a basement. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The man wasn't just some deranged creep with a dead body. He had someone locked up, alive, and hidden beneath the apartment. I felt sick to my stomach, but there was no time to think. I had to act. Grabbing my phone, I called the police again, this time refusing to take no for an answer. I told them everything, the whispers, the footage, the basement, the woman trapped inside. They had no choice but to send someone now. I gave them my address and hung up, my hands shaking. But I couldn't wait for them to arrive. Every second felt like an hour, and I had no idea what that man might do if he realized I knew too much. I had to go down to the basement and find her before it was too late. I found the entrance to the basement behind a door at the end of the hallway, hidden beneath an old, tattered rug. The air grew colder and statler as I descended the narrow staircase. Each step felt heavier than the last, the darkness below swallowing me whole. The smell of rot and dampness filled the air, making it hard to breathe. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, broken appliances, and piles of garbage. And then I saw it, the door, a thick metal door with a rusted padlock hanging from it. My hands trembled as I searched my pockets, realizing I hadn't brought anything to break the lock. Desperate, I started looking around for anything I could use to force it open. That's when I saw it, an old, rusted crowbar half buried beneath some junk. Without thinking, I grabbed it and wedged it between the door and the frame, using all my strength to pry the door open. The padlock snapped with a loud crack, and the door swung open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. And there, huddled in the corner, was a woman, pale, gaunt, and terrified. She looked up at me with wide, pleading eyes, her lips cracked and dry. She was covered in bruises, her wrists raw from what looked like rope burns. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Get me out of here." Without thinking, I rushed over to her, pulling her to her feet. She was weak, barely able to stand, but together we stumbled out of the basement, up the stairs, and into the hallway. Just as we reached the top, I heard the front door of the building slam open. The police had arrived. I turned to look behind us, and there he was, the man from apartment 202, standing at the end of the hallway, his eyes wide with fury. But before he could take a step, the police tackled him to the ground. handcuffing him and dragging him away. As the paramedics arrived to take the woman to the hospital, I stood there trying to process everything that had just happened. The nightmare was finally over, or so I thought. As I returned to my apartment later that night, I found another note waiting for me. This one wasn't from the man in apartment 202. It was from the woman I had rescued. All it said was, "Thank you, but be careful. He's not the only one." I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at the note, my mind racing with questions. What did she mean by that? And who else was involved? I knew one thing for sure. This was far from over.